Cool. Welcome to episode 81 of the PHP Town Hall. The Book of Psalm is our topic today. We're talking today with Matthew Brown out of Vimeo, and you probably know him because he wrote a static analysis tool that breaks your heart every single day, every time you make a push. Matthew, how's it going?
It's going great. I'm a heartbreaker. Thanks. That's what they've always told me.
You know, look, I mean, between you and Andre, everyone has to get their heart broken at some point with static analysis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ben, how's it going?
That's good, man. The move is complete. Still a shit ton of stuff to unpack, but at least we're in here now.
Nice. Very cool. Very cool.
How you been, Matt?
So I'm alive. I dragged my dad on a 50-mile bike ride last weekend through Nashville.
Have you recovered?
He's alive. He broke a spoke on his bike, actually, so I feel kind of bad about that. But yeah, he's alive. He's doing good. And then I just signed up for a 100-mile one today, so we'll see.
Nice.
I don't know why you'd do that. I mean, I like taking a bike ride, you know, like a night like 10 miles, but 100 miles is silly. I'm sorry, but it's silly.
It's a perfectly fair question. I'm not exactly sure why I'm doing it either.
I mean, I once went for like a 40-mile walk overnight, so maybe I don't have much of a leg to stand on. But yeah.
Yeah,
I did a 40-mile bike ride one time, and I haven't forgiven Phil Sturgeon since.
I remember that. I remember seeing those tweets and just like, damn, that sucks. So we wanted to bring Matthew on because we've talked to a lot of Laravel people over the past like 8 episodes, and Taylor has still not paid us for any of that free sponsorship. So we wanted to give some cooler people in the community some time to talk about their projects. And so Psalm is one of the 2 biggest static analysis tools in PHP. There is another one, Fan, but I that one's kind of a little bit smaller of a project. So kind of what inspired you to create Psalm, and kind of like how long has that been around so far?
So it's been around. I the first incarnation, which was a like 200-line PHP script, I started in mid 2015, so 6 years ago, and so I've been working on PHP static analysis since then. And I basically, I've told the story before, but it's very straightforward. I broke a thing, and I don't like breaking things. I tend to break things a lot. But like part of my kind of personal quid pro quo, and also it's just something expected, you know, at Vimeo, and I think a lot of other companies, if you break something, like the aim is to only break a thing in a particular way one time, right? That after that you figure out ways to stop that thing breaking in that particular way, and so there weren't any tools available at the time, at least that I was aware of. I was also like unplugged from the PHP community. I didn't really know it existed, so I thought I'll figure out a way to analyze PHP code so this doesn't happen again. And I kept making mistakes and kept figuring out how to prevent those mistakes using static analysis. And then other people said, hey, can this prevent this mistake as well? And so it just kind of snowballed, and the range of what is considered a mistake and an issue has expanded. So first it was just finding like misspelled classes, right? Class names that are incorrect. And those are things that are just definitely going to blow up your project. And then it became more kind of theoretical. It's like, this could break a thing if you passed in this incorrect data and you didn't know. And so it's expanded, and now Psalm can help the most kind of particular software developers, those who, for example, don't want to write any code that could mutate state somewhere else. So if you have a method that you don't want to write to a database, for example, and you don't want any of the things it calls to write to a database, you can encode that in the type system. Basically, you can, and PHP Standards has also recently adopted some of those same ideas. So the idea of and that's about like functional programming. I mean, it kind of takes ideas from functional programming and enforces functional purity, which I don't really have time to go into now, but people who are interested can look it up. And I wrote an article about this about a year ago, I think, maybe a year and a half ago, about how I kind of got it working in SARM. So it kind of, again, over time, I've broadened the scope of the things that SARM can find and in many cases fix.
Cool. And so you start out liberal by default, and you're like, we'll constrain more, or do you start constrained and like we'll go more liberal?
Yeah, and so SARM also has a way of running where you can run it with a kind of a low error threshold. So it has a level thing, and so if you start with a high level, it will only detect those things like misspelled classes that will definitely crash your app. And then as you lower the level, it gets more and more strict. And at level 1, it's the most strict. It's basically looking for any place where it can't infer a type. And if it can't infer a type, it will warn you that it can't, and you'll be forced to fix some code.
Cool.
So when you were, because you said it started as kind of like a 200-line script for you to kind of monitor your own mistakes and stuff like that. When you started writing this, like, were you familiar with static analysis beforehand, or were you kind of Googling static analysis and understanding the concepts behind that as you were expanding the script from 200 lines to what it's turned into like today?
There are kind of a few lectures at university. So I studied computer science at university, and we had a couple of lectures on kind of type theory. Well, more than a few lectures. We had some number of lectures on kind of type theory and encoding some kind of very basic problems and proving problems formally. Kind of like just like the most kind of obvious tautological things. And so I had some idea, and there was like an optimizing compilers course that touched on some of the same ideas. But that was like, as I'm sure anyone who's had a kind of fancy computer science education tells you, that when you actually get into the world of writing code at a big company, you're normally you're doing stuff that you could have learned yourself. Like you're not actually normally doing anything particularly complicated. But I've always had this kind of slight desire to do something smart, to do something that like expensive education justified. So I was. There aren't too many things I had to Google, because it kind of makes sense just on its own. Also, I was around the same time I was exploring the use of TypeScript and Flow in JavaScript code bases. So I was oftentimes trying to mirror the things that it could pick up as well. So yeah, it didn't really require much Googling. It was basically getting the key things that helped accelerate SARM was like getting it set up with Nikita Popov's PHP parser, which was excellent, and that just like made it suddenly much better. Previously, I was using the token generation features of built-in PHP, but that just didn't cut it. Yeah, it was kind of it. Most static analysis stuff of like the kind of the basic stuff is fairly intuitive, and the stuff that but moreover, there is so much PHP specific stuff that some and similar tools do, that like there wasn't much stuff you could Google like there. And I've tried in the intervening years to write some stuff to help other people who are kind of maybe treading this or similar paths. But yeah, it's not like there's lots of academic literature on static analysis of PHP code.
So what was the hardest feature you've added?
So there are kind of two answers to that question. One is like the most interesting kind of computationally, and the other is like the one that involved the most pulling of hair out. And the most pulling of hair out is definitely cache invalidation. Like it's always like we love cache invalidation. So understanding when a file changes, what all the other files that could have affected, that could be affected in that file change. That's just something that it's I think it's correct now, but it's something there are lots and lots of edge cases, the way that traits and file includes work and all sorts of other things that make that a more complicated problem than maybe other languages have. The most interesting kind of computationally, and kind of maybe like hardest to explain in one go, but I've tried, is the way in which Psalm understands how different conditional statements relate to each other in a way that allows you to do some kind of basic algebra stuff, that allows Psalm to do some basic type algebra that can then inform its understanding of types. And that's something that tools like TypeScript and PHP Stan and MyPy, like there are a bunch of other static analysis tools don't do it. And I thought I was kind of like, I thought there was something kind of obviously wrong about it that I was missing. But then it turned out after I kind of submitted it to a subreddit of people who care about this sort of stuff, that there is one other language that does it in a kind of like one other somewhat well-known in academia language that does it. And so yeah, it's a valid thing, and it slightly improves Psalm static analysis, and it takes a kind of 5% performance penalty to do it, but it's worth it.
So because you said you kind of started writing this like on your own, did Psalm emerge before PHP Stan was a thing, or was PHP Stan kind of a thing and you just kind of didn't know it was there?
Yeah, that. So basically, so Hack had existed, right? And so for anyone who doesn't know, Facebook were big users of PHP, but Facebook's demands, like, you know, most PHP developers are like over here. Let's get it right. Most PHP developers are down here, like with their like this, you know, small personal websites, and, you know, maybe some like larger scale businesses. You know, there are some Etsy, some Vimeos, and then there's like Facebook up here, which has just like, you know, now like many billions of users. I think like half the world's population is on Facebook/Instagram, and WhatsApp, and so they basically they required more things than PHP could offer. So they built, and they had a lot of money that the rest of the PHP community doesn't have. So they built those things, and they kind of made them specific to a lot of the time. They answered the needs that Facebook had, but they didn't answer the needs that the regular PHP community had. Which like the regular PHP community really cares about interoperability. Like, will this thing work on, you know, like various versions of Linux? Will it work on my Mac? Like, will it work everywhere? Facebook really only cared about, will it work on our servers? And so like, and there are a bunch of other things that kind of sprung from there. So, but Hack had come out, and I think that had come out 2013 or 2014, and they've been kind of working towards it for a while. So they've been kind of getting away from like what most people would consider to be PHP for a while. And they came out with Hack, and there were at that point, and I wasn't really involved in the PHP community, but I know that there are a bunch of conferences where, you know, there would be people talking about how to do X in Hack, that, you know, people, and they were kind of evangelizing Hack to PHP developers, and most PHP developers didn't jump ship. They stayed in PHP, but a number of companies that were kind of like the larger companies, Etsy being one of them, which employed Rasmus Lerdorf, the creator of PHP, thought, okay, how can we do some of that stuff in PHP, and there were developers who were working on making PHP faster, which was one of the chief things that Hack did that PHP didn't. So there were a bunch of internals developers making PHP 7 just much faster than PHP 5, which is great. But some of the tooling that Hack provided, most importantly, the type checking tooling, static analysis tooling that Hack provided, there weren't any good answers for in the PHP community. So Hack, so Fan was Rasmus's kind of early answer to it. As I said, I wasn't involved in the PHP community. I certainly didn't follow Rasmus on Twitter, where he was starting to talk about these things. And so in 2015, I kind of went and started on my own thing. And from the sounds of it, I think it was around the same time that Andre started on what then became PHP Stan. So yeah, all these kind of things emerged about a year and a half later, after being working on them for a while, and we felt kind of comfortable about making them public. And then everyone was like, oh, well, and PHP Stan came out, I think, about at least 6 months. So there was a kind of a big announcement about 6 months before, and Andre had already had a relationship with the PHP community. He had gone to conferences, like he had worked on the Slevermat coding standards, which a lot of people use, which Sam uses. So he had some kind of kudos. So like when he said, like, I've come out with this thing, people were like, great, let's try it. And it took a bit more convincing for me to, it took some convincing for me, from me, to get people to start using static analysis as a tool, because at the time that Andre and I were kind of like coming out with our own things, the majority position of PHP developers was still like, why do we need static analysis? And that was the bigger fight. It wasn't like PHP Stan versus Psalm. It was PHP and Psalm, PHP Stan and Psalm versus everyone who thought static analysis was a waste of time. Yeah.
So like when it was like you and PHP Stan against the world, basically, like, was there ever any talk of kind of combining y'all's work together to kind of form one big static analysis project to kind of put your brain power, brain trust together? Yeah. Or
so I would not actually, it's fair to say, like, Andre reached out to me about probably about 4 years ago now, and said, what if we combined efforts? And I, in retrospect, well, I still think it was the right decision, but I kind of slightly immaturely emailed him back and said, no, I think Psalm is better. So basically Psalm was, in my view, better, but and PHP Stan had these had a bunch of issues that I felt made me feel like I was doing something better. But PHP Stan was about 10 times more popular than Psalm, just by download count. So it's fair to say I was kind of like, I was in peak evangelizing mode, and I was trying to say, hey everyone, like, this thing, I've produced this thing which has few false positives and like does X, Y, and Z. But Andre was saying, I've produced a thing which lots of people are using and lots of people are excited about, and also has a pretty good API, so that if you have a project with like some kind of pretty custom behavior, you can, using the PHP Standards API, you can add these custom rules that will help you, that will kind of help detect and helps PHP Standard understand that project. So it was like two kind of quite different philosophies. I was building a tool that I thought was like a kind of more like TypeScript. So with TypeScript, you don't really have the opportunity to like, you can't really develop. There is really a burgeoning TypeScript plugin market. You just you run TypeScript on the thing, and it's either good or bad. And I was wanting to make Psalm into a tool like that. So the idea is you run Psalm on your project, and it says yes or no, like, does your thing have errors? And it was only, I think, quite a bit later that I understood the beauty of what Andre had done, but with expanding an API, with creating an API that made it really quite easy for people to do to integrate PHP Stand into their setup. And not me, but another contributor called online, he's Bruce Weirdan, created a really very decent plugin API for SARM that like made things much easier, and like all subsequent API implementations have piggybacked on that.
So, did your email to him actually say no, SARM is better, or was it more political?
It was polite. I mean, I don't know how off the rails do you want this to get, but let's have a look at that email. And if it is terrible, So,
what if you should just like frame it on your wall or something?
So I mean, I hadn't actually thought of it until you just asked. So it was 3.5 years ago. It was late December, so I said, like, when I say I think SARM is better than PHP Stan, it mostly comes from a place of pride and arrogance, not empirical understanding. And so I list the places I think SARM, PHP Stan was better, which is basically it has a cool loading bar. And then I kind of really listed the things that I thought SARM did better, which now I think like SARM, like PHP Stan has basically kind of eradicated those things. Wait,
does it not have the loading bar anymore?
No. Sorry, this is to say that the SARM got the loading bar, but PHP Stan also fixed all like points. Well, 1 through 4. Point 5 was SARM works in PHP 5.6, which no longer is true, but was also a necessity because Vimeo at the time was running PHP 5 on most of its boxes. So anyway, there was this kind of like, and I said, good luck. And
I love that. Like, here's the things that are good about your thing. The loading bar is kind of cool. Yeah, here's the things that are better about my thing. Everything else.
So it was right. It was kind of rude, and but I think he took it like he did ask like, are there areas you think PHP Stan is better than SARM? And I mean, so I was responding to like questions he asked, and he says like, I love to work on PHP Stan full time. And my goal for the next year is to launch a paid SaaS. So like I think he was like a year out, but basically he's done that. And I think like having someone who earns money from their tooling is an incredibly good thing for the PHP community, because the PHP community has a lot of people who are, it's maybe their first or second programming language. Like it's they're kind of fairly, many of them are beginners, and they can do with a lot of guidance, and tools like SARM and PHP Stan can help provide some of that guidance, like in the same way that PHP Storm can. There aren't a massive amount of like expert PHP users who can, for example, build static analysis tools. So I think that means there's a very good market for people like Andre to create and market tools. And I encourage anyone using this, watching this, who uses PHP Stan, like either donate to Andre or like sign up for PHP Stan Pro, because I never want to feel like I still think SARM is better, but I also see great value, and I think many people derive great value from PHP Stan. For 90%, I think, of users, realistically, they're not going to see any difference between SARM and PHP Stan, just because like their code base is probably at a stage where like they're still kind of, maybe there's still quite a lot of work to do. So like, so yeah, I if you use PHP Stan and like back to your point at the beginning of this, not a few people really enjoy using static analysis tools, but if you think that it's saving you money, then absolutely like figure out what it's worth to you and maybe give a bit of that back if you can.
So I was giving you shit at first before we started recording. I actually do enjoy using static analysis tools. They make my life just a little easier, right? Because it's always better to find something before it deploys than after.
Yeah.
I mean, like it gives you confidence to like leave your computer on the weekend if you're working on any kind of critical type system, or like a always up API type thing. Like you can, I know, like so at my old job, we used Psalm and Stand together. And because of that, we were still deploying on like Black Friday as an e-commerce shop because we had full confidence in our code because of like what you two have created. So, I mean, if you don't use it, you're kind of missing out, I think, a lot of like great features and things like that. And so like I want to circle back up in a minute about Andre because you and him worked together on a return type to the core of PHP. But I think one question I think a lot of people would probably be curious about is so Psalm is under the Vimeo namespace. How does that work in terms of your day job versus an open source project? Are you allocated a few hours a week, or is Psalm kind of your full-time job at this point?
It's not my full-time job. It's something I work on. Like it's always been this kind of like extra, kind of slightly extracurricular thing. So I started when I think for the first 2 or 3 years of Psalm, my working on Psalm, certainly for the first couple of years, about 2/3 of the work I did on it was outside company time, and the time I was doing the time I was using at the company was kind of, I felt guilty and it was kind of grudging. Now it's a bit more like in my job description that I'm helping work on developer tools and helping developers of Vimeo be more productive. And obviously at Vimeo, like when people, we have lots of people writing PHP, and when they have issues with Psalm, I'm a person they can come to, and I can help explain some of the things, and I've helped like over time improve our code base with Psalm. So there's a value that people see there. I do now have the GitHub/Psalm, github.com/Psalm namespace. Like at some point I might move Psalm there, but I think when you kind of composer install it, you'll still be composer installing Vimeo Psalm, because I don't think there's any good reason to give it up. I mean, Vimeo has the one big thing that Vimeo provides Psalm is not, one, like I'm employed by Vimeo and I get to see the effects of Psalm every day. But the other thing is it's just a big code base to test against. So having access to the, a million lines of PHP means that every time, like before every release, I run Psalm against the code base to make sure there are no regressions. And that's tremendously important. Like that helps the quality of Psalm stay. I mean, Psalm has, I think over I think 1.5, I can't remember the exact number, but I think maybe 1,500 tests, something of that, and they're essentially end-to-end tests, most of them. So like Psalm is well tested, and it also tests against a battery of about 4 or 5 different projects that are kind of selected because they do weird and cool things. But having that million-line code base to weird PHP stuff is really good. So yeah, like Vimeo has in employing me, and the fact that I spend time during office hours fixing the occasional Psalm bug, has contributed to the project. And yeah, I don't really see any value in changing, in kind of moving it away from Vimeo. Unless Vimeo want to completely wash their hands of it, which could happen. Anything can happen, but I don't see it happening. I mean, with Fan, and I guess I'm slightly superstitious. Fan moved from Etsy/Fan to just Fan, and basically since then, like its growth kind of flatlined. But there were also other issues, like PHP Stan came along and then Psalm after it. PHP Stan and Psalm both used, neither of them required a PHP extension to be installed. And that was like the kind of the big athlete's foot, no, not athlete's foot, sorry, the big ankle, the
Achilles heel.
Thank you. God, my Greek references are slightly lacking. Athlete's foot, yeah. The Achilles heel of Fan, which is now overcome. Like Fan, you can run Fan without using the extension, but that I think hobbled Fan right out the gate and prevented it being used in more places.
There's probably a certain amount of like credentialing you get just by having a large company name behind it, right? Because people feel safe using something.
Well, yeah, and also there's a value that Vimeo gets from being associated with a popular open source project. I mean, it's not like, you know, it's not TypeScript, but it's certainly the biggest open source project that I've created. Yeah, I mean, as a big tech company, I mean, you know, again, I can't talk financials, but like as a you know large
how big
tech
exactly
company,
Matthew?
Yeah. As a large tech company, there are certainly tech companies that don't put much out in the world when it comes to open source, and everyone has good reasons for doing that. You know, open source can take a lot of time, but I mean, here this was just kind of an obvious opportunity. So when I discovered that Fan existed, and especially that Fan had been created by the creator of PHP, which, you know, just lends it some pedigree. I asked my then manager, and I was like, should I stop working on? I was kind of dejected, and I was like, should I stop working on Psalm? Like, and he said, no, you know, there's some value in having something that's like done in house, and so I kept working on it, and kind of ironically, Fan has just kind of sputtered where Psalm has continued to grow.
So I mean, as someone managing a large open source project that I would imagine you had no idea would ever grow to this kind of size, what has so far been one of the hardest things for you to, I guess, learn on the job in terms of open source management?
Yeah, it's definitely a whole bunch of different skills. So there's like writing code is the easiest part of it, but it's when you have one person, when you have one person assigning you tasks, right? In a traditional company, you've got like a project manager, or maybe your boss is like, you know, assigning tasks from in Jira or GitHub, whatever. That person is conscious of your you know, what's on your plate, and they're conscious, you know, they're conscious of your time. They're conscious, you know, to not inundate you. They're not going to assign you like 50, you know, if they're assigning you one task or one or two tasks a week, they're not going to suddenly assign you 50 tasks in a single day, because they know that might kind of, you know, inundate you. But with open source stuff, especially as it gets more popular, that can happen just randomly. So you can be going along trying to kind of close issue, and for a while I was like really proud that I only had kind of 50 open. Like at one point I remember thinking like I've like 1,000 closed issues, if only 50 open issues. Like, well, hey, like I'm really killing open source development. And the truth was, it's like not that many people were using the software. And now I think there's something like 600 plus, and that is the hardest thing of seeing that kind of issue count kind of trend up and up and up and up, and knowing that there basically you won't be able to stop it. Like it's a kind of foregone conclusion now that it's basically always going to go up, and you can close bugs, but more people are going to open issues. And that's also okay. So there are a few things to that. Part of that is it's a self-inflicted wound. With Psalm, I have added so much functionality, partly in a bid to kind of outshine PHP Stan, but partly also because, like, you know, I wanted a particular thing, for my work in Vimeo, so I just added it to Psalm. That basically they're like Psalm's code base. It's the biggest. It's I think the biggest PHP code base probably in maybe aside from WordPress. It's a very 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 big PHP code base. So it's about 30% bigger than PHP Stands code base, just like the SRC directory. And it's not like Psalm is like really inefficiently written. Like it's the code is kind of doing all the basic same things that PHP Standards is doing. It's just doing about a bunch more. So it does unused method and unused variable detection. It does security scanning, so it can find security vulnerabilities in a whole bunch of different ways. It has and there are a few other things, and that means that there is just like way more potential. I mean, I'm one person who's developed most of these features, and there aren't a ton of other people. So I've kind of created a lot of extra work for myself, but realizing that and being at peace with that is very important. And I think that's the kind of that has made me a slightly happier person. That like I've created this work for myself, but people also see great value in it, and that no one is. I mean, in on the whole, no one is kind of like creating an issue and demanding it be fixed. Like, occasionally you'll get someone who creates an issue and will kind of like say like a bump or like why isn't this fixed, and you have to kind of be like, this is an open source project. Like this is you're welcome to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed that with Fractal too. Ever since I got access to that, and it's hard to keep that count down. And also, I mean, I'm not sponsored by my company or anything to work on that, so even finding time to work on that project is hard, to say the least. No, I mean that makes a lot of sense. It's cool that like Vimeo gives you the time, and also like having that huge, massive code base behind you gives you, like you said, like probably one of the best regression tests you could possibly ask for.
I mean, when releasing, it's very good.
Yeah. So like I said, so you just got no return added into the core. For a lot of people, so I kind of want to like pull the curtain back on the core for a minute and kind of like what is the process you had to go through to get all that accepted?
I mean, the RFC process is pretty straightforward. You first you kind of figure out whether a thing. Well, first I just had to personally figure out whether I could get no return, technically never, whether I could get a never return type to work, and whether it would be useful to have. So I kind of had to ask myself the question, like, is this a feature that I think belongs in PHP core? And then can I, like, knowing very little C, can I actually implement this feature without breaking PHP? And I reached out, I think, to Ilya, I think is how you pronounce his name, who had merged a couple of RFCs in the last, who had a few RFCs approved recently, most particularly the match RFC, which is great, and he worked on the enum RFC as well. I think he wrote it. He didn't write the RFC. He wrote the code. I mean, he did the implementation, and he kind of felt like it was a good idea. So yeah, I basically got to writing some C, and I wrote that first draft of the RFC, and I thought, like, Andre, if it's seen as a collaboration, I know Andre cares deeply about types, and I thought like it's going to have much more chance of passing if Andre is on board, and so I had him review the RFC, and he had some suggestions, including like changing no return, which is my proposition, to never. So we ended up like holding a vote on that, and never passed. And And I think kind of, both of us behind it, it overcame some kind of slight opposition, and passed the vote. And so yeah, it's a very small implementation. It's like less than 100 lines of like self-generated PHP. It's like self-generated code and like some tests. Yeah, it was straightforward.
Do you have any other RFCs you plan to work on, or anything you wish someone would do?
So Andre is, he wants a follow-up RFC to be class name. So PHP strings there was the class constant that was added in PHP 5.6, I think. But there are often occasions where PHP strings will be passed as class names to functions or methods, and that will represent the name of a class that would then be like instantiated with new or something, so something dynamically instantiated. So introducing a class name type, which, like the never type, is probably not something that many people will use a lot, but is something that that framework developers would presumably want to use quite a lot, because a lot of different frameworks will take a class name, and it's something that is already, and it also matches the path that never took, which is that it's already supported in R tools. So SAM and PHP Stand and Fan, for that matter, support a class-string type, which you can annotate in doc blocks. And anytime you're passing class-string to a function or method, the tools like verify that thing that you're passing is a valid class name. And so the idea would be for PHP to do that check as well. So any class name type would have a check. So in the same way that callables right now, if you specify that something's callable in a method, it does an extra check to make sure it's callable. We would kind of have the same basic idea. So we would do a check to make sure that it was a valid class string.
That's cool. I like it. So would it support both the class names as string and class names as constant, or just one or the other?
Yeah, because it would be equivalent to, and I said the deal is like, I'll go in with you on this RFC if you do the first C implementation, because I think it's important to as many people to get their hands dirty with like an actual C code base as possible. So yeah, basically, the implementation would treat class name $foo as string $foo, followed by in the first line of that function would be like, if not class exists $foo, then like throw type error. So you could boil that code down to those kind of operands. And so it shouldn't be a too complex an implementation. And then it would allow us down the line to maybe add like parameterized class names. So like you could then say class name, but it's class name angle bracket exception, and then that would only accept class names that were either exception or subclasses of the exception class. And that's something, again, that's supported today in our tools in doc blocks, but that doesn't exist in actual PHP.
That's cool. I really like that y'all are working together to kind of take these things that you both already support and move them into a central location, which is the language. It's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, also there is precedent in Hack. So Hack has done a bunch of these things already, and kind of saying, look, so Hack was obviously created at Facebook and mainly for Facebook, although Slack use it as well. So they've proved that a bunch of these ideas can work at scale, right? That, like, well, first of all, they proved that a static analysis checker can find bugs in PHP, and that can work at scale. And so then in PHP land, we had things like PHP Stan and Psalm and Fan come and like kind of show that. And they showed that like, property types and they had a bunch of things before PHP did. And they also had a no return type. And like, they proved the value of that. And in fact, in some of the discussions that we were having like on Twitter, one of the Hack's, I think, chief maintainer, I guess you could call him, Fred, chimed in to talk about how useful the no return type was in Hack. So again, Hack has a class name a type already that it's kind of shown the value of that, and so we're hoping just to kind of piggyback on that basic idea.
I mean, it seems like a lot of the like functionality for the last couple of releases of PHP has really just been Hack features that have been ported over to PHP, which seems pretty cool. That, like you said, Facebook proved that it can work at scale, and so now you have.
Absolutely. I mean, there are some, but there are also, credit where it's due, there are some features that don't exist in Hack yet. So like the match expressions, for example. And I think there are some things that like Hack is looking at and thinking, oh yeah, we should maybe add that too. The two languages have kind of diverged. So at one point there was interoperability between Hack and PHP that like that the Hack engine could run PHP code. That's no longer the case. It's its own complete ecosystem now. Can they still use Composer? Maybe, but I don't think for long. I can't think.
So what's what's on the roadmap for Psalm? Like, let's say the next year or so. Like, besides keeping up with 8.1, 8.2, 8.3, and potentially 8.4 whenever that comes out, like what else are you really looking to kind of build on with Psalm?
So I was having this discussion with Andre the other day. I don't see Psalm, like Psalm does a lot. So as I was saying, it was like 30% larger than PHP Stan, I think at least 30%. Code base wise, and keeping up with PHP 8.1 is like, as you mentioned, that will take a bit of work. Like I have a basic stab at the enum implementation that's kind of released, so people can play with that. But there isn't really too much more on the roadmap. And Andre says he has lots of ideas for PHP Stan. I'm kind of at the point where with Psalm, I'm thinking it's mainly just like bug fixes and like maybe performance improvements. There aren't kind of the big, like the security analysis was really like the last big step in a kind of into unknown territory. And there's still plenty of work there to do to make it kind of more accurate. But there are no kind of big banner features like that I think are going to come out in the next 6 months at least. I can't see them. There are no ideas that I have. And again, it's so tied into my work at Vimeo. It's like at Vimeo, what issues am I seeing PHP developers dealing with? What things don't make sense? And is there a way that static analysis can help? And oftentimes it's like better processes, better whatever. But I don't see obvious things that like a type checking static analysis tool can do. The one thing I'll say, like one thing that might be interesting is incorporating some kind of metric stuff, but there are tools that already do that. So there isn't anything that I think Psalm would. So like having kind of code quality metrics that would trigger a breaking build or something. But again, I kind of feel like that maybe is like doing too much. Because there are other tools that probably do that and maybe do it better. So the answer to your question, like, and I guess it's like no news is news. Like I don't foresee any big functionality coming down the pipe.
Cool. No, I mean, like, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, Psalm does one thing and it doesn't really well. You don't really need to add more and more and more on top of it just to add functionality.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. So cool. I mean, thank you so much for coming on. Like, we really appreciate your time. If people want to chat with you or anything like that, where can they find you online at?
I mean, there's Twitter, and so like Twitter has an official, Psalm has an official Twitter thing, like Psalm PHP, and that's where I recommend people go, because if they follow my like regular Twitter thing, they're just going to see a whole bunch of tweets about American politics that maybe they don't, maybe aren't to their liking. So yeah, I'm Psalm PHP. That's where you can interact with Psalm as the kind of main kind of thing.
And like one last question, you kind of hit on it a little bit, but like, so obviously coronavirus kind of shut down the whole conference scene for a little while. Like, do you have plans to hit up conferences once this is all done? Do you have plans to kind of do like a Psalm roadshow, like spread the gospel?
Yeah, right. I mean, that's all of the like biblical, like all kind of theological things are there with Psalm. Not massively. I think the one thing I haven't really talked about in that kind of setting, in the conference setting, is the security analysis, which the more I look at, we've been reviewing tools at Vimeo for Ruby static analysis, like security analysis, and the more I look at the landscape, I kind of realize that Psalm's security analysis is kind of, well, it's unique in its the kind of open source static analysis tool that covers security issues, and a lot of a number of security developers at kind of some big companies have helped out and made that the security analysis better, because they see the value of like an open source tool that does what it does. So I might want to talk about like examples of how that's helped at Vimeo's code base, and on other open source projects, because I think that's a kind of a fun story. But I mean, honestly, I love travel, and I've talked at one conference in Munich, International PHP conference, I think, which was a lot of fun, and I got to meet Andre, and I got to meet Sebastian Bergman for PHP Unit fame, and I really enjoyed that. But I also kind of felt I could reach more people with just like tweeting, and you don't kind of have a captive audience when you're tweeting. So like I think the attention spans are much lower, but I like the fact that a lot of people, like, I can put an article up on the Psalm website and lots and lots and lots of people can read it, and more than ever, because like I'm not confident in my ability to put together a half-hour conference talk that you would want to sit down. I mean, I've been talking here for now an hour. I'm monopolizing a lot of the conversation, and I'm not sure that I have not bored a lot of people. So
I doubt that.
Whereas I can write an article and I can kind of winnow it down, like kind of make it tighter and tighter to the point that it like hits all the things that like it can hit, and it kind of it's much more accessible. It's kind of hopefully easier to archive. Like there's all of that stuff. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, I don't want to shut the door on it, because I do enjoy traveling and I do enjoy meeting other people in the PHP ecosystem, and I mean, and I've been kind of doing lots of random travel recently because everyone's been indoors for the past year. So yeah.
Well, I mean, to be fair, like people invite me to conferences to talk, so if I can do it, like literally anyone can do it.
What? No. I've watched your conference talks. You're a very likable person, and you're very good at explaining things in ways like you have your you're not saying like every other word, which is something I clearly struggle with. So I think it's unfair. Like I mean I don't want to blow smoke up your ass, but like I think there's a you have a lot going for you.
Aw, thanks.
You have a great personality, Matt.
I'm going to talk to my therapist about that on whatever day I see him next. No, but on a serious note, thank you so much, Matt, for coming to talk with us. It was absolutely great to chat, and hopefully we can do it again sometime soon, either with another RFC that you have planned or just sometime in the future. So thank you so much, man. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, take care.
Thanks.
Bye, Ben.
Bye, Matt.
Bye.